due puldu tuju. That's the extent of my speech. That's the extent of my Bahasa in Indonesia. Welcome to this Congress. Vice Minister, thank you very much for coming. Honoured guests, keynote speakers. It's wonderful to see so many friends and colleagues from so many different countries. I'm still waiting for my presentation. It's not here. It's not on the screen. I'm sorry about this, colleagues. I should really start again, but I won't. Colleagues, thank you very much for your patience while we dealt with that sort of technical problem. It's a huge pleasure to be here and to welcome you to this 27th ICSEI Congress. Time does fly. And to welcome all of you who've flown on many aeroplanes to get here today. I'm very grateful indeed. For those of you who don't know, I'm currently based at the University of Malaya in Kuala Lumpur. And as you can see, I've brought a very large contingent of my colleagues with me. The last 15 months has been an absolute delight to be working in that part of the world and to get to know a little bit about the culture of Malaysia, but more broadly of Asia and now Indonesia. And I have to say, I've been welcomed and really surprised by several of the cultural aspects that I've encountered. But most of all, I think, from my colleagues in the University of Malaya, it's been the warmth and generosity of spirit that they've welcomed me with. And it's that same spirit that you no doubt will experience here today and for the duration of the Congress. I wanted to say a few things by way of introduction. And I guess you would expect me to talk about ICSEI, and I will talk about ICSEI. And maybe you'd expect me to start by talking about the mission of ICSEI, the vision of ICSEI, and all those other very important things. But that's not the place where I'm going to start. I'm going to start with a school in a place called Tower Hamlets in the centre of London. A very deprived borough, and this school has struggled over many years to improve its performance. The young people there come from very deprived backgrounds. And there is a view sometimes of, well, what can you do with these young people from these contexts? The one thing we know from school improvement and school effectiveness research is you can do a lot. The schools really do matter. And irrespective of where you come from, where your starting point is in life, your school makes a significant difference. For me, ICSEI is about this. It's about creating success for every child in every setting. And for some fellow academics, this may seem a wild aspiration to want every child to succeed, irrespective of their starting point in life. And I get told quite often, but Alma, you know how deprivation can affect life chances. You know the disadvantage makes a difference. Well, in that school in Tower Hamlets and so many other schools like it, disadvantage does not make a difference. And success for every child in every setting is not just a wild aspiration, it's a reality. And I think at the heart of school effectiveness and school improvement is this aspiration and core belief that we can and we do make a difference on a daily basis. And for those people who turn to me and say, that is just not going to happen, my response always is, well, whose child do you choose to fail then? Whose child do you say you don't have a life chance? Surely it is better to aspire for this than to set our sights so low that we meet them. So what's driven me in my work and so many colleagues here over many years is this core aspiration, that we can and we do make a difference, and that we will continue to research and find ways of making more of a difference. So this aspiration becomes a core reality. I wanted to say a few things by way of introduction, and to organise this brief talk, I've organised it around the C in ICSEI. I'm going to talk a little about context, because that's very important. I'm also going to talk about the challenges that this field and researchers, practitioners and policymakers in this field face. I'm going to look at some considerations and finish with this notion of community. Being in Asia for the last 15 months has been a roller coaster. It's interesting, you think you know everything about a culture until you actually live in it. And the contradictions and surprises are there to experience. And Indonesia is one of those surprises. The fourth largest population in the world, an economy that is booming and growing so quickly. The view is it will outpace China. It is growth on a massive scale. And as your Vice Minister said to me earlier, you've just introduced in Indonesia a brand new curriculum. There's an activity-based curriculum. And reading between the lines, I think that's about developing 21st century skills. Being in Asia as well, you get that sense of optimism, of boom, that potentially you don't get maybe in England or other parts of Europe right now. This is a continent on the move. And in decades' time, you will see massive changes here. In the latest ICSEI Express, if you've looked at it, I talk about the fact that as this particular shift takes place, what does it mean for an international congress of school effectiveness and school improvement that has premised not all, but most of its research within a Western context? So that's going to be a major challenge for us in the next decade. Also, there's the international component. You heard that I think there are 37 different countries here today, and we welcome every single one of you. But the challenges of this global world, the changing education, redefining education, is something that I think the field needs to embrace and to encounter. Let me say something about what I think the challenges are, because they are real, they are tangible, they are important, and you may disagree with them, you may say they're not really acute challenges, but I think they are, for me anyway, challenges not just for the field, but for me as a researcher who's interested in improving schools. The global educational reform movement, or juggernaut, still dominates certain countries. And it brings with it the whole associated machinery of standardization, accountability, and all the other familiar mechanisms we know. And there's nothing intrinsically wrong with those mechanisms unless they actually are imposed on a system and begin to drag that system down. And I think school effectiveness and school improvement has a different discourse around the things that work and the things that matter. So the challenge for our field is to remain authentic to those things and to offer that different discourse when there's a dominant feeling that some countries simply have the answer. The PISA results have caused, quite predictably, quite a lot of reflection, discussion, debate, angst about relative performance of different countries. And it is interesting to note that in the top 5 countries, or systems rather, of PISA, they're dominated by Asia. And in our desire to compete in this new international league table, there's a danger that we search for universals, we search for answers. Countries look to other countries that are higher up the league tables for the blueprint, the silver bullet, the answer. And again, one thing I think the school effectiveness and school improvement field has done is to look at the complexity, to look at the fact that there probably aren't any universals, and that culture and context matter, and matter a great deal. I think the other challenge for us as a Congress and a community is to continue to push the boundaries, to continue to ask the hard questions, to not be complacent about what we know. And of course we do know certain things. And the State of the Art session is all about reinforcing what we know, but also looking to the future and saying, what questions do we need to ask? Ultimately though, even though we are a practitioner, a researcher and policy group, we are ultimately involved in generating scientific knowledge. Not the latest thing, not the next fad or fashion, but something that is grounded in empirical evidence, something that comes from more than a hunch or an idea. It comes from serious empirical inquiry, and that's what makes us a scientific field. And the one other major challenge I think facing us is, are we one field or are we many fields? Are we one Congress, or are there many subsections of that particular area? Here are some considerations that I think as a field we need to reflect upon. The first is the unit of change. We've always believed, and hence the name, the International Congress of School Effectiveness and School Improvement, that the school is the unit of change. And what you'll hear from Jim Spillane fairly shortly is that maybe that's no longer the most important unit of change. Maybe the classroom is and always has been, and maybe instructional practice is the most important lever and unit of change that we have. With the advent of technology, schooling is changing and changing rapidly. And you'll hear again over this conference from Jill Jameson, who will talk about the way in which technology is redefining and reshaping educational practice. And maybe that's not immediately visible in many of our schools and many of our classrooms right now, but in 10 years' time, undoubtedly it will be. There's some methodological challenges, and I think we still debate those in the field, and we're, I guess, probably a lone voice in terms of those international comparisons of saying that, yes, they matter, but they're not the only thing that matter. We need to look elsewhere for our explanations of educational excellence. We undoubtedly need to connect with other fields. And there are other global networks, other organizations out there. So we're not alone in striving for equity and excellence. There are other organizations that want exactly that same thing. So we must not be an exclusive Congress, we must be inclusive. And most importantly, and I guess of most challenge, is the policy, practice and research interface. It's easy to pay lip service to that and say that it is wanted and needed. It's harder to actually do. And one thing that we've introduced in this particular Congress, which is new, is a debate between policymakers, practitioners and researchers to give us their different perspectives on certain themes like professional learning or teaching effectiveness. So we're able to see where the fracture lines are, and we're also able to see where we can make more connections. In a recent piece, I talked about ICSEI as being a community, and it's often described as a family, but I don't think it's a family because you can't choose your family, you can choose the people that you actually research with and talk to in an intellectual way. But I want to reinforce that it is a scientific community. It's based on empirical knowledge, it's based on research. We hope it's inclusive, bringing in different countries, different perspectives. And I hope through the duration of this conference, you will challenge some of our strongly held views. We hope it's a connected community, but more than that, we have some very strong networks. I was at the pre-conference yesterday, and I was delighted to hear how those networks are functioning and making us very strong connections between different perspectives and across different countries. Ultimately, it's about learning, and we hope that the Congress is also influential. It's not just here that we want to make a difference. We want to be influential outside this Congress when you leave in 6 days' time to go with a different perspective and to have an influence and to reshape things. Ultimately, the future is out there. The future is in the hands of young people sitting in classrooms right now. Recently I was in a school and I was talking to a group of young people, and I was asking them what they wanted to do when they actually left school. And one little girl turned to me and she said, "I'd like to be a hairdresser." And I said, "Well, that's fantastic." And she looked at me in the way that only young people can look at you. And she said, "No, it isn't." And I asked her why. And she said, "Because I'd hoped for so much more." And when we think about the international comparisons, and when we think about the test scores and the data, that's important, but not as important as the hopes and the dreams and the aspirations of the young people that we serve. So, Tarima Cassidy. No doubt I will say this again and again, I've already said it many times, but Swazi, would you please stand up? And can I formally ask you to thank Swazi and her amazing Indonesian team. You can see from the amount of detail that's gone in just to this opening ceremony, this is going to be a fantastic conference. I'd like to switch gears a little bit now, and I have the honour of mentioning our two life members. One is Lorna Earle, the past president of ICSEI, who unfortunately can't be with us today, but I think I would want to publicly say that she has contributed such a great deal to this particular organisation. And I think in her absence we should actually applaud her. The second Life Membership Award goes to Karen Seashaw. And Karen Seashaw is undoubtedly well known to everyone sitting in this room. Her scholarship goes beyond description. She has had many more awards, I think, than this individual award. But I want to say something about Karen that her CV doesn't say. And she might not even remember this. But in 1994, when I was much younger than I am now, we all were in fact, I was a relatively unknown researcher, and I went to the American Education Research Association conference, which happened to be in New Orleans. It's very hard being a researcher, you understand. And Karen was clearly one of the big names, and still is. But Karen met me for a coffee, and she took the time to have a conversation. And I think I'll ever forget that. And the message is, I think, that we all stand squarely on the shoulders of giants. So will you join me in welcoming one of the giants of educational effectiveness and improvement?
wouldn't talk for more than half an hour. I want to make a couple of remarks. First, it is such a, I feel very humbled here because I'm the one who's standing on the shoulder of ICSEI giants, many of whom are here, a few of whom are not. The people who first told me about ICSEI, because I was not one of the original charter members, and who encouraged me to come and contribute. More than that, I just want to make a couple of comments about what ICSEI means to me. And it really is all embedded in the name. First, international. I have probably feel that the time I have spent living in or working in more than 20 countries has been more influential in shaping the kind of research that I do at home in the United States than any experience that I've actually had at home. And I get a lot of my inspiration from coming to ICSEI because there are, in fact, 37 countries here, and I always go home with very new ideas, something that I would never get when I go to the American Educational Research Association meetings. The second is school effectiveness and school improvement. For many years, my research has crossed over between the boundaries of school effectiveness and school improvement, which in many contexts means that I feel that I don't really have a home. Here at ICSEI, I feel that I can really bring together my interests in both of those trends and both of those lines of work and find networks that explore those in much greater depth. So the challenge for me in coming here is really to say, what have I boned up on that's going to contribute to both effectiveness and the improvement conversations, as well as which networks am I going to actually have time to participate in, because all of them are so important to me. So ICSEI is really part of my intellectual home. It's the conference that I enjoy the most every year, and in fact, I don't usually love to go to conferences, but I do love this one. And the few that I've missed have been for important personal reasons like the birth of a grandchild or something functionally equivalent. So I hope to be here for at least a few more years, and I'm so deeply appreciative of this honor, which is in fact really at the top of those that I've gotten. Thank you so much.
Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, music is in the air. Again, we would like to present to you another performance, orchestra music, by the students of the Music Education Department of Yogyakarta State University. The first song is Indonesia Jaya by Riosa, and the second song is To Love You More by Tika.
Indonesia Jaya, once popularized by an Indonesian pop singer, Harvey Maleholo, was composed to motivate all Indonesian people to raise and make Indonesia a great and prosperous nation. To Love You More is a single by Celine Dion, released in Japan in 1995. The song character makes an impassioned plea to her lover so that she does not leave her for another woman. The conductor for today is Agus Tianto. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome orchestra music.
Terus